Now, the COVID news that has been coming out of China over the last couple of weeks is alarming. Huge numbers, an estimated 250 million people in China have had COVID over the course of the last month. And just as alarming, we got the figures yesterday that in Japan, over 400 people had died in one day with COVID on their death certificates. So is the ghost of COVID coming back to haunt us? I'm joined by Dr. Chris Smith, virologist, and I have to say that you've done some amazing work over the course of the pandemic in, telling us what's going on, thenakedscientist.com. Chris, we're hearing that America are now putting travel restrictions on people coming in from China, that Italy are doing the same. Is COVID coming back to haunt us?
Well, COVID never went away. And what we're seeing really are the ripple effects of an ongoing evolution of a virus and a pandemic. It hasn't disappeared. And in this country, the UK, we've had about 1.5 million cases in the last week. What has changed is the level of immunity in the population. So where we previously were all vulnerable and all potentially vulnerable to getting seriously ill, your risk greater if you're in poor health already or older. Now, thanks to vaccines and thanks to exposure, our risk is much, much lower. But it's a different story in China. This is a population who've been shielded away from the virus, almost like a log pile that's been kept under cover and is now bone dry. And one spark has ignited it, and unsurprisingly, with nothing to stop it burning, a fire is rampaging through, and that's exactly what we're seeing.
Well, it appears to be happening to some extent in Japan as well. Chris, I mean, the point about vaccines that you make, having the jab and having the boosters, it doesn't make us any less likely to catch COVID, does it?
The vaccines are very good initially at preventing infection. The evidence we have is that when you're first vaccinated, you make a really good antibody response. And antibodies are sticky molecules that float around in your blood, and they neutralize things that shouldn't be there. You make them in response to vaccine, you make them in response to infection, but they don't hang around forever, and your body doesn't waste time making something it doesn't think it needs. So unsurprisingly, as time ticks by, you slowly lose the level of antibody you make. As the level falls, your susceptibility to infection increases, but your level of or threshold at which you can get infected that you need to get below is higher than the threshold at which you will develop severe disease. So you're initially protected really well against infection and severe disease, but as the level of antibody declines, you may then slip down so you can catch the infection, but you're still defended against becoming severely unwell. And that's sort of the situation that the majority of the world population are now in, having confronted COVID for real, in many cases off the back of vaccination.
Is there a danger with what's happening in the Far East at the moment, and given the actions that we've seen from the Americans, from the Italians and others, is there any evidence that this could be a new variant?
Well, the data we have so far, and many people are very cautious about what the Chinese tell us, because we know that they haven't been forthcoming with the information on many fronts, on many occasions over many years. But what we do know is that they're dealing with an Omicron variant, which is the same one that the rest of the world is contending with to greater or lesser extents. We don't think it's specifically the virus at this stage that's doing anything different. It is the fact that they've got a highly susceptible population, many of them unvaccinated. It's that log pile which is just tinder dry and ready to go up like an inferno. That's what's causing it. The worry is, will this turn into something else? The worry is, will this elaborate because of the scale of the outbreak, new versions or new variants of the virus, in the same way as we've had the Kent variant, now known as Alpha, the variants from different parts of the world that have cropped up. Will that happen with China? Will we get that missing Z variant that the WHO diplomatically skipped over to avoid offending anybody? It would be ironic, wouldn't it? But we don't know at this stage. What I will say is that I think it's unlikely that this is going to happen, because what causes viruses to evolve is to surmount some kind of barrier, and that barrier is immunity in the human population. And what China haven't got is a huge amount of immunity. So there isn't the selective pressure on the virus to turn into something that will defeat a vaccine. I
get the point. Chris, thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to speed with that, and let's hope Let's hope that Chris is right. All I can say is if we get another major outbreak, no more lockdowns. I don't care what the circumstances are. Never, ever again.